Ah, the Nemesis System from Shadow of Mordor. That were a good idea, that. And Warner Brothers must have had it, because they've got the patent. Oh wait. No, it's Warner Brothers. They don't have good ideas. They ruin them.
You said nothing could top Nemesis. Stars.
For several years, I've joked about having a midlife crisis, but I don't know. Looking at the various crises in the world today, I think maybe clutching a Medabot and pretending it was decades ago might actually be one of the most rational, sensible things you could do. It's less like a midlife crisis and more like midlife crisis management. Look, it beeps. Life's okay. Life's okay. Oh, before we begin, just going to be self-indulgent for a second. A video game that I had the distinct pleasure of working on, Quantum Witch, is out on June 24th. I'm one of the writers on the project. I wrote a pretty chunky story arc for the game. Very proud of it. It's going to be my first bit of narrative writing publicly available. There's a really cool trailer. Yeah. Right, that's enough of talking about a game that's just gonna be good on its own. Let's talk about a game that started really good, really well, really promising. And then Warner Brothers happened. The original version of this video received a little criticism for being a bit too harsh to Laura Fryer, and on reflection, yeah, maybe a bit. While the point of view she's talking about is stupid, she is generally on the level. I've watched her before, and it's not bad stuff. I did make a conscious effort not to go after her, because I tend not to when it comes to former executives, unless they're Mike Ibarra. But I didn't do a good job of drawing a line between my criticism of the attitude she's sharing and my anger at the Warner Brothers executive class in general. So to make it clear, that's what I'm attacking. not her. While scouring the internet to find another subject to desperately pull out of my ass at the last minute because that deep dive into Altered Beast PS2 that only I'm gonna watch isn't ready yet, I came across this story about the Nemesis System, a critically lauded gimmick from Shadow of Mordor that could have meant great things for game development if Warner Brothers hadn't slapped a patent onto it among several other vile acts of corporate ruination that have come to typify the company's harmful influence on not just one, but several artistic mediums. Apparently, creativity can at times come from a place of utter cynicism, at least when you charge actual creative people with the task of fulfilling a cynical goal, instead of letting executives muck it up. According to a recent revelation, cynicism was indeed the ground bed from which the Nemesis System sprung, as it was conceived, amusingly, to combat what was the biggest game industry boogeyman at the time, the spectre of used game sales. Yes, the Nemesis System was an attempt to stop people trading in their games. I find this interesting for a few reasons. Not only is it a nice snapshot of a time where the industry was being completely stupid about a thoroughly invented problem, examining exactly how much that problem was blamed for the industry's status at the time provides a great lens through which to look at the state of the business now. Plus, as I've been saying for a long time, Warner Brothers is one of the most despicable and poisonous influences the game industry has ever had, despite companies like EA and Activision getting all the spotlight, and I'm happy to take any excuse to talk about what the monument of corporate grotesquerie has committed in the name of getting richer quicker. If you don't know what the Nemesis System is, and as time goes on fewer and fewer people will, thanks to Warner Brothers locking it away in its huge vault of intellectual property that it doesn't plan to do anything with, it was a neat little setup in Monolith's Lord of the Rings open-world orc murdering simulator Shadow of Mordor. Intended to give players a more personally entrenching experience, the Nemesis System gave orc leaders uniquely identifying aspects pulled from an assortment of randomly generated traits, each one having their own name and title, as well as a selection of strengths and weaknesses that could be countered and exploited by the player. Said players' activities would influence this system directly. Orcs could develop resistances to things used against them, they'd move up the ranks if they defeated you, and one orc in particular would almost inevitably become a very literal nemesis, popping up regularly, even defying death to hound you. My favourite part of the whole thing was how generic nameless orc grunts could get a leg up onto this system if they happened to score the killing blow. The idea of some nobody mook becoming a dangerous worthy opponent is just really exciting to me. As anyone who has played it can tell you, it was the cast of orcs themselves who really made this thing work. As cool as the system was, I don't think it would be half as appealing if the prospective nemesis weren't so enjoyable to encounter, what with their entertainingly overacted voices, memorable appearances, and personalities. While we are talking about the Nemesis System as a mechanic, I really can't emphasize enough how much applause Shadow of Mordor deserves for taking utterly factory standard, chaotic evil foot soldiers from Lord of the Rings and turning them into legitimate show stealers. Yet all this was, according to former WB executive Laura Fryer, part of the game industry's desperate attempt at the time to conquer the perceived scourge of second-hand games. In a video about the game, Fryer detailed how the drop-off in sales after the acclaimed Arkham Asylum launched had been blamed, without real evidence of course, on the used game market, and the publisher didn't want Rocksteady's alleged defeat at the hands of GameStop to happen with Monolith's latest. Fryer explained the point of view from the executive mindset concerning the boogeyman of used games, saying this was great for gamers because they could buy the game and then sell it back to a company like GameStop and buy something else. It was great for GameStop because then they sold that used game for a discount and they pocketed the money. Oh my god, a corporation pocketing the money off someone else's hard fucking work. That must have been such a shock to Warner Brothers. Hypocrites. She then lamented how the developers were only getting paid for the first copy sold and lost millions of dollars, as if it were the people who did the actual work who were going to profit most off the game's success, instead of her executive buddies and the shareholders gripping their leashes, demonstrating, as always, how games management continues to repeat propaganda unchallenged even though their own actions routinely discredit it. Weird how they always act as if it's the developers who stand to lose most, despite executives being more than happy to trigger layoffs and close down studios even when those developers deliver a massive success. It's like they know they're not going to generate sympathy if they talk about the people who are actually profiting, you know? because they're not sympathetic. Anyway, she said they needed to make a game so compelling that players wanted to keep it forever, which makes me laugh because of how much the idea of making a good game is treated like some mystical new form of wisdom by executives. This is borne out by her saying, "We knew Monolith's game engine wasn't yet capable of having a fully open world like a GTA, and this team wasn't interested in going the multiplayer route, but we still had to solve for the constraint, and this thinking is what led to the Nemesis System, arguably one of the most creative and coolest game features in recent memory. I bloody love it." The sentiment is, well, we couldn't just copy a game that was already successful, and we couldn't just hop on the same bandwagon we and everybody else kept hopping on, so we had to rely on having actual ideas. Just an absolutely perfect glimpse into the corporate mind there. The creative solution is literally the last resort, the desperate gambit for these fucking clowns. And yes, what do you know? That last resort turned out to be the definitively best thing to happen to the game, almost as if letting developers develop their games rather than rely on the archaic mandates of so-called industry leadership makes better products. That is, until Warner Brothers inevitably, predictably, despicably fucking ruined it. But we'll get to that. Right now, I want to look at what the business was like at the time, specifically the miserable way publishers were acting about used games. I remember it well because I spent a lot of time calling it out, all that used game fear-mongering for the propagandistic lie that it was. Little more than the new game piracy, which was little more than the new game rentals. The game industry always needs a villain, you see, a thing it can blame for its own failures, or rather its successes that fail to be successful enough to support the lie of infinite growth that executives have spent years maintaining for the infantile benefit of their investors. Just as they had blamed Blockbuster in the 90s, publishers blamed GameStop in the 2000s, and they did a pretty good job of convincing mainstream game developers at the time that every used game sold was a guaranteed loss of their money, just like how they pretended every pirated game equaled a lost sale. Pure mythology and unfounded speculation. Throughout the 2000s, used games became the reason behind every setback, the scapegoat du jour. Crackdown didn't sell very well? It was definitely because of used sales. Arkham Asylum had a drop in sales after launch. All those launch copies were definitely traded in. And the people who developed those games would have certainly been millionaires by now if GameStop hadn't pocketed their money. Hyperbole was off the charts, with used games being labelled by some as literally worse than piracy. It was one of my earliest realisations at just how entitled to special treatment game publishers felt they were, that they wanted to exert ownership over copies of games that they'd already sold, that they wanted a cut of the take beyond that point of sale, to not be like every other physical product in the world that people are free to do what they want with after they've bought it. They truly felt like they were owed something forever. Nowhere did that feeling of entitlement make itself more known than with the online pass, the industry's ultimate pathetic answer to a problem they'd exaggerated out of basically nothing. A system that mostly inconvenienced paying customers and did little to fix anything before ultimately being scrapped. The online pass gated a system's online features behind a one-time use code that players had to input if they wanted the full content they just bought, because there is nothing more exciting than starting a new video game by typing in a 20-digit code on a console's shitty digital keyboard, right? The heart of the scam here was that buyers of a used copy would find online features inaccessible unless they purchased a brand new one-use code directly from the publishers for $10. So it was that publishers contrived a taxation on second-hand games, a way to get money they didn't deserve at all but felt they were owed all the same. And you might be thinking, yeah, okay, that's gross but effective leverage for games with significant multiplayer components, but what about single-player games? Having an online pass for those would be pretty silly, right? Didn't stop them though. The online pass still made it into offline games, with companies just selecting a bunch of content to gate off behind the second-hand paywall. You better believe Warner Brothers was all over this bullshit too, because of course they were, with Arkham City holding its Catwoman missions to ransom if the code wasn't input. I suppose just arbitrarily putting up walls around content is much easier than coming up with innovative ideas like the Nemesis System, huh? I always ask to what is next. I would ask, what would happen if the industry did conquer the scourge of used games? What happens if they do that? Which looked pretty inevitable, and the world learns. If used games stopped being a so-called disaster, that it didn't fix anything, and all the problems being blamed on GameStop are still happening, what would they say then? What would they blame? And, well, you know, here we fucking are. Used games are barely a thing these days. The all-digital future publishers cream their jeans over has been here for a long time, and yet, you'll notice, the industry is not the gainful utopia it was supposed to be. In fact, it's worse off than it's ever been. Even despite the record revenue coming in, executives are more desperate than ever to maintain their farcical fantasy of perpetual company growth. Layoffs and closures are at an all-time high. Mainstream games are a fucking mess, with online services that are shut down just months after launch, because even though trade-ins aren't a huge problem anymore, customers are still turning away from the product shortly after they come out, even if said products are literally designed to engage them for a long time. Executives want to talk about developers losing money. Developers aren't just losing money, they're not even just losing their jobs, they're having their jobs taken away from them by absolute cunts. And GameStop isn't pocketing their money. Warner Brothers is. All of the companies who have spent the last decade dismantling the video game industry to an unsustainable degree, they pocketed almost all of the money and left an industry of destitute developers behind. They used to say used games were worse than piracy. The people who most had the temerity to say that used games were worse than piracy were committing an industry-wide heist. They are the worst kind of pirate there is. Except maybe literal pirates. And a few of those are better. It turns out I was right. I don't want to see anybody in 2025 acting like used games were a disaster for an industry that was far healthier than it is now. Yet everything publishers put out back then has long been exposed as bullshit now the so-called disaster has passed and nothing got better. GameStop is on its last legs. The boogeyman is slain, yet the disaster continues, and none of the executives have considered that unlike rentals, unlike piracy, unlike trade-ins, they have been an ongoing constant through every crisis. And as the leadership making all the calls, maybe they're the problem. Warner Brothers took all the critical acclaim and goodwill Shadow of Mordor earned and burned it on Shadow of War, a game that took the Nemesis system and burned it on loot boxes, the at the time trendiest scam that Warner Brothers embraced with open arms. The impact on the game's quality was immediate and harsh. Shadow of War turned the orcs, once naturally occurring enemies whose growth felt personal to the player, into fucking loot box content, an oversaturated and wholly unnatural part of the game, utterly ruining the very essence of the Nemesis system. The abundance of orcs meant traits got recycled more, the ease with which they could be pumped in and their reduction to loot meant they stood out less and meant far less. As with any game built around microtransactions, the entire structure of the game changed for the worse. Pilloried as a grindy, unfulfilling, gambling-oriented mess, Shadow of War eventually had to remove the loot box marketplace, which necessitated a redesign of core aspects of the game, because it turns out when game companies tell you monetization doesn't affect game design, they're talking bullshit. I want you to sit with that a moment. That difference Warner Brothers' influence made to the Nemesis system. Monolith's answer to the problem of publishers wanting more money was to innovate one of the most critically acclaimed gameplay systems of the action genre. Warner Brothers' answer to the problem of publishers wanting more money was to literally ruin it. That's what they did. That's what the executives did the very second they got their hands on something that had succeeded. They vandalized it, trashed it, and fucked it all up. And they have the fecal nerve to blame others for the industry's problems. Used games weren't a disaster, you fucking clods. You were the disaster, you always were, and you still are. As if to further compound this truth, Warner Brothers has since only further ravaged the work Monolith did. They patented it, ensuring other developers couldn't evolve the idea rather than fuck it up like WB did. And even worse, they confirmed they have no plans to ever use it again themselves. That's right, they have the Nemesis system under lock and key for the express purposes of ensuring no new game will ever use it again. Literally taking a creative idea with so much more left to give and taking it away from the world. That's Warner Brothers' contribution to the game industry right there, seizing ownership of the contributions of others and hoarding it for the hoarding's sake. Oh, and of course Warner Brothers has more recently closed Monolith down, killed the company off, indulged in more layoffs to further swell an already crowded unemployment number. That's Warner Brothers' contribution. That's what they did. That's what they do. and they said used games was a disaster. Mainstream video game publishers are enemies of creativity, enemies of expression, enemies of the precious free market they claim to love so much, enemies of development and enemies of video games in general. I am a writer by trade, I pick my words astutely, and I truly mean it when I say the video game executive is the enemy of video games. And I'm so angry that talking about how they're part of the system and that system's nemesis means they were the real Nemesis system all along is a line of humour I don't even want to pursue, except of course I just did. Moreover, as enemies of everything to do with video games, these companies are in turn their own worst enemies, as evidenced by how blatantly they're destroying their own sustainability with every short-sighted move they make. They're their own worst enemies, but they're so busy inventing enemies to blame, they'll never realise it. You could say, right, that they were the real Nemesis system the whole time. Oh, little sweet Meta Bee, you're still relevant like the Wii. The Wii is still relevant because it's the 2000s and everything's okay. Thank God for me. Oh, I could have rhymed that with Meta Bee. And Wii. It. Just gonna keep doing this till the credits start.